Elden Ring Nightreign is a Souls game that barely feels like a Souls game. It's been stripped down, sped up, and rebuilt to a roguelike boss rush. It's fast, frustrating, and sometimes even unfair, but I couldn't stop playing. Over 100 hours later, I think I finally understand what makes this strange spin-off so compelling. In this video, I'm breaking down everything that's changed in Nightreign, from the core gameplay loop to the multiplayer, the randomization, and of course, the bosses, to explore the question, what defines a Souls game? And does this newest entry still carry the Souls-like magic? Souls-like is a weird word. It gets thrown around like shorthand meaning difficult video game, but that's not an entirely accurate summary of the series. The Souls series and its brethren share more than just challenging combat. They share conceptual and thematic connections too. So before we get to talking about Nightreign, we first need to ask, what actually makes something a Souls-like? Let's start by taking a look around the worlds of Bloodborne and Elden Ring, two games that are separated by a decade of industry evolution and, to my knowledge, don't overlap in story at all. Buried in these broken worlds, complex histories can be unearthed through hidden item descriptions, architecture, boss arenas, and cryptic dialogue. For discerning players, the lore of these cursed worlds is rich enough to fill entire YouTube careers. The word grim comes to mind when picturing places like Yharnam or Caelid. Destroyed structures, death, decay, and a foreboding sense that things are not right here and haven't been right for a long time. Combat 2 forms part of this overarching identity. Early Souls titles were defined by their weight. Every swing was slow, every dodge precise. Famously described as hard but fair, the gameplay matched the grim worldview in a case of ludonarrative harmony. The bosses, another iconic part of the Souls series, represent the greatest challenge these worlds can give you. Often the climax of an area, almost moulded by the world around them, the bosses in this series bear down on the player with size and strength. The goal is to overcome not only the challenges of combat, but also the world itself. This is why the rhetoric about the game's difficulty is so prevalent. The combat is hard, yes, but not in isolation. There's a specific combination of tone, structure, and difficulty. Not just how hard it is, but how it's hard. The oppressive nature of the world is the common thematic thread. You're an insignificant speck in these places. Many have come before you, and many will come after. You died, the Souls-like states, and your death was inevitable in the face of such a world. So that brings us back to Nightreign. From Demon Souls to Elden Ring, the genre has gradually evolved. Faster gameplay, more ambitious bosses, and an open world, but it never broke the formula. Even Elden Ring, despite all of its scale and freedom, still retained the oppressive heart of a Souls game. So how does Nightreign stack up against the pillars that have held the Souls series in such high regard? Well, to answer that, we need to talk about all of the changes made in Nightreign, starting with the gameplay. Nightreign is a spin-off title developed by genre pioneers FromSoftware, remixing elements of base Elden Ring as well as pretty much all of their previous work. It's a multiplayer Souls-like roguelike, and if you hadn't realised this yet, Nightreign is a steep departure from the traditional Souls template. Funnily enough, it's actually pretty much what you might have pictured when I called it a Souls-like roguelike, as the gameplay is broken into timed runs where you drop into a map to fight and loot your way to a culminating boss fight. Each run starts from the safe hub of the Round Table Hold, which from my understanding of the lore is the same one as base Elden Ring, but in an alternate timeline where a cursed eternal night has overtaken the mainland. Here, you can equip relics or select a character before setting out into the world by choosing a Night Lord to challenge. You're then dropped into Limveld, a distorted version of Limgrave from the base game, with various points of interest randomly populating the map. These locations range from simple enemy camps to complex castles with multiple bosses to face. As with base Elden Ring, the goal is to gather runes through killing enemies and level up your character. The character leveling is set on a linear trajectory, with each playable character having different skills, abilities, and scalings for each stat. Along with these abilities inherent to the character, you can choose to acquire passive buffs from any weapon or talisman picked up. Weapons giving these permanent buffs is new to Nightreign and adds some interesting utility to carrying weapons that you don't intend to actually otherwise use. Also note that there is no weight limit to these items, just an item slot limit, meaning filling these item slots is always beneficial. Once the run begins, a hidden timer starts for day 1. After roughly 5 minutes, the Nightreign storm begins to encroach and shrink the safe area of the map. You'll then have about 5 more minutes until it shrinks again and traps you in a boss area. Beat the boss to progress to the next day. Day 2 plays out similarly, with the storm timer resetting and another countdown beginning. After the Day 2 boss, you have the chance to face the Night Lord selected at the beginning. Dying during either of these nightly bosses has you lose the run and be sent back to the round table. If you beat both bosses, however, you're transported to an ethereal world to face down the Night Lord. As with the roguelike genre, part of the challenge is learning to manipulate the game and its mechanics to increase your odds of success, and in that way it can be very rewarding. A fast-paced, high-stakes gameplay style can feel very satisfying when going well, with your snap decisions paying dividends, but can feel oppressive when things take a turn. Sometimes the domino that brings down your run is your own greed, getting sucked into a fight you aren't ready for, or wasting time on a distraction en route to the actual objective. But unlike other games in the Souls series, sometimes a doomed run in Nightreign can simply come down to bad luck. As part of this review, I went back and completed another playthrough of base Elden Ring, with some Dark Souls and some Bloodborne. I found there to be a stark dichotomy between the old and the new. While Nightreign is clearly built from the same base genes, it's like a sibling that was born a decade later than the others. Base Elden Ring can be as slow and methodical as you like. Take your time to explore the landscape, slowly build your character and weapons, and chip away at the massive world. Whereas, Nightreign is so strict on time you can scarcely afford to even stand still, let alone look around and explore. In this change, the perpetually ticking clock has stripped the game of a tangible atmosphere. Nightreign feels more like speedrunning a Souls game than playing one, ignoring most enemies and learning which bosses and items are worth hunting down. Making a mistake doesn't feel like succumbing to a grueling world, but instead, like you need to restart an arcade game. Through this, Nightreign begins to feel like something else entirely. While the mechanics and assets are pulled directly from what came before, the tone, structure, and pacing shift dramatically. There's no time to soak in the world, no space for quiet dread, no sense of building tension as you search for the next bonfire. The oppressive atmosphere, once woven into exploration and discovery, is now simply set dressing. If all that it took to be a Soulslike was difficulty, Nightreign would meet the mark. But in order to better understand how the world has changed, we next need to talk about the multiplayer. Nightreign was initially marketed with multiplayer at the forefront, and it was seemingly designed with that as the intended experience. The game includes both single-player and multiplayer modes, but at launch the single-player mode was significantly more challenging than the multiplayer. While a later patch adjusted this balance to make solo runs more fair, early players encountered a much steeper difficulty curve when playing alone. In the absence of a pre-made team, players must matchmake with random teammates to play the multiplayer mode. These random teammates will vary greatly in skill, often resulting in unreliable experiences. While plenty of enjoyable teams can be found, instances of players disconnecting at the start of a match or going AFK are not uncommon. Due to how the game scales enemy difficulty for multiplayer, boosting both damage output and health, these unreliable teammates become a direct liability. During multiplayer matches, communication between players is limited to map markers. Attempting to coordinate with players who ignore teamwork is greatly frustrating and often results in needing to compromise your own agency. In combat, downed players don't immediately exit the run. Instead, they enter a revive window where other players can deplete a floating bar above their body to bring them back. However, the difficulty of reviving increases with each attempt, preventing it from functioning as an infinite supply of revives. Several characters possess skills and abilities that offer the most benefit when used in a team setting. However, Souls combat was originally built for a single-player experience, and boss fights where the boss is constantly shifting aggro between different players can feel imprecise and unbalanced. The team-based buffing powers, or relic-based team buffs, are a band-aid solution over a deeper systemic design limitation. Post-balance patch, playing solo offers an experience closer to the traditional Souls template. Runs are more consistent, and the player retains full agency over their route, pacing, and decisions. Without the need to accommodate less skilled teammates or sync strategies with uncoordinated strangers, solo play allows the weight of the challenge to fall entirely on the individual, much like the classic FromSoft titles. Beyond the changing gameplay mechanics, the multiplayer is also detrimental to immersion. In traditional Souls games, solitude and isolation is key to building tension. How can you be the latest insignificant speck in the world when you're flanked by two other sword-wielding players pinging markers on the map? Much of this atmosphere collapses under its own tonal mismatch. Consider a game like Dead Space 3, the third entry in the beloved horror series that added co-op as a core part of the experience. This was a horrible idea. Having a second player beside you turned what was already a mediocre horror game into an action game with gross enemies. You can't build tension when another player is teabagging corpses in the corner. In Nightreign, the same principle applies. When you're never truly alone, the world stops feeling alive and starts feeling like an arena. And in the case of Nightreign, it's not even a handcrafted arena, but a randomized one. Playing roguelikes can feel a bit like gambling, rolling a slot machine and hoping the outcome lands in your favour. But unlike pure chance, roguelikes give you some degree of control. Even in a bad run, a skilled player can turn the tide. This dynamic tension between randomness and player mastery is what makes roguelikes so compelling. Games like Hades and Returnal are great examples of this balance, where random item drops and layouts shape each run, but smart decision making and strong gameplay can carry you through. Nightreign adopts many of these roguelike elements. Each run features randomized map layouts, item drops, events, and most importantly, boss encounters. While the general structure and flow of each area remains consistent enough for players to learn over time, the exact placement of loot, enemies, and challenges changes with each attempt. Every item drop is randomized, extending the gambling feeling to even the micro encounters and chests. A defeated boss drops a glowing orb that allows you to pick one of 3 rewards. These rewards are pulled from a pool relevant to the character you're playing. So for instance, Wilder gets greatswords more often than Recluse. This soft synergy system adds a bit more predictability to the randomness. And while the randomization is a core part of the gameplay, it can also be frustrating when poor drops leave you fighting an uphill battle. Honestly, part of the learning curve of the game is knowing when to cut your losses and just abandon a doomed run. To some extent, the randomized elements of Nightreign feel like a natural extension of what Elden Ring was already experimenting with. Many of the catacombs, dungeons, and ruins in the base game already felt procedurally inspired, modular, disconnected, and lightly remixed in layout. In that context, it makes sense that FromSoft would explore a more formalized version of this with a roguelike structure. Instead of feeling like an uninspired location dropped into an otherwise stunning and interesting world of the base game, Nightreign's openly modular design can actually be fun to learn, like the way you'd memorize a Rubik's Cube in order to complete it faster. Interestingly, it seemed that the map generation isn't actually fully random. While working through the list of trophies to get the platinum, I came across a Reddit post explaining how a specific map layout could guarantee an ancient dragon boss spawn. After re-rolling the Dark Drift Night for about 30 minutes, I found the map layout, and as Reddit predicted, the exact ancient dragon spawned. This suggests that the game actually pulls from a large pool of pre-built map combinations rather than generating them from scratch. This gives the illusion of full randomization while maintaining some control over the encounter design. For better or worse, this shift towards randomization marks another point where Nightreign diverges from the Soulslike formula, and yet it's not without merit. The roguelike design introduces a compelling gameplay rhythm, exchanging the purely skill-based progression of a traditional Souls game for one driven by both skill and luck. In this structure, success isn't just about mastery over the mechanics, it's also about adapting to an unpredictable set of conditions, gambling on rewards, and making the best of what you're given. That mix of control and chaos defines the flow of each run in a way that is foreign to the Souls-like series. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the culminating challenges that are the boss encounters. Despite many of the bosses being reused from earlier Souls games, they've now been adapted to fit the roguelike format and updates to combat. The combat in Nightreign remains close to the standard set by base Elden Ring, with melee, magic, dodge rolls, and type mechanics. However, they've swapped Torrent with a simple super sprint and added a mantling double jump. While the mantle is effectively only a traversal tool, the super sprint is a significant improvement. Rather than trying to summon and dispel Torrent, you're now able to swap in and out of super sprint at will, making it not only faster, but more controlled too. Using the super sprint to chase down an erratic boss is especially effective because you now retain your ability to dodge roll, granting the ability to use iframes where before there was none. The updated mobility helps the returning bosses remain enjoyable to relearn. Since Nightreign is essentially a speedrun, most boss tactics now lean towards speed over safety. Adding to this, all enemies except for the nightly bosses and night lords retain any damage they've received, even after your own death, meaning you can brute force your way through a fight if needed. Dying drops not only the runes you currently have, but also a level's worth of runes from your character, weakening you slightly and costing you time. That said, it's a relatively forgiving system that encourages riskier, aggressive play. The bosses are heavily varied in strength, ranging from an absolute joke that is the depraved perfumer all the way up to the nameless king. While these returning bosses are still mechanically solid, they've lost much of their dramatic weight. In the original games, bosses were like events, a payoff for persistence and determination. Here, they're speed bumps on the way to the true challenge, the Night Lords. If Nightreign is just a speed run back to face the Night Lords, then they might as well be the tipping point in deciding whether the heart of this game is still truly a Soulslike. Being the only newly added bosses, the Night Lords are the centerpiece of Nightreign, and probably the best argument it has for being a true Soulslike. Each Night Lord features a unique elemental affinity and moveset, offering strong and memorable encounters that test both your character's build and your understanding of the game's systems. They're satisfying capstones to each run, and while most of them can be beaten in a few attempts, they still demand focus and adaptation, especially if you're running solo. That said, the roguelike format shifts how these encounters feel. Dying to a Night Lord means restarting from scratch, losing at minimum 30 minutes of gameplay. It's the longest runback in the entire Souls series, making each attempt a high-stakes gamble. Dying to a Night Lord, after amassing what feels like the strongest assortment of gear I'd ever gotten, with the boss itself so close to death, is one of the most crushing defeats I've ever experienced in one of these games. Among the Night Lords, Night Aspect Holster stands out as a genuinely punishing fight, the kind of challenge I would have brute forced my way through if permitted to do so in the traditional Soulslike. I was able to eventually beat him solo, but only after I truly learned to manipulate the game's systems, granting me enough consistency to finally learn his attack patterns. With the Everdark Sovereign updates, FromSoft has begun rolling out enhanced versions of Night Lords, and an upgraded holster sounds both terrifying and incredible. Maybe they'll just throw Radahn in beside him and call it a duo fight. With the new roguelike loop, combat updates, and randomization, boss fights in Nightreign have a distinct flavour amongst its peers. They've shed their Souls-like status as symbols of the world's will to crush you, now taking place in a dreamlike void, but they do retain the challenging and interesting combat flow. This might be a hot take, but I think that the faster style of combat might just be the best in the spiritual series. It may not evoke the awe of its predecessors, but in its own high-speed and arcade-like way, Nightreign finds a rhythm that's genuinely fun to play. So with all that being said, it's time to ask the final question of the video. Does Nightreign retain the soul of a Soulslike? Ultimately, Nightreign is a fascinating offshoot of the formula presented thus far, aiming to be faster, leaner, and more replayable. Sometimes I found myself craving just one more run, and other times I couldn't stand it, knowing just how unfair the game can be. Despite my mixed feelings, I still spent over 100 hours playing the game, and after all that, I can confidently say, no, Nightreign doesn't carry the Souls-like magic. No longer are you the lone survivor facing down a cursed world. The illusion is broken, and we can see behind the curtain. While the combat is familiar, the world and the gameplay are unrecognizable. I don't think Nightreign works as a Souls-like. I don't even think it works exactly as FromSoft wanted it to, but I do think it has something special. It's executed a strong blend of roguelike elements with challenging combat, and polished enough of the edges to keep it all flowing smoothly. Nightreign has successfully replicated the addictive qualities present in all the best roguelikes, and for such an experimental game, that's still a pretty big win. So after all the changes it's undergone, Nightreign no longer feels like a Souls-like. Instead, its legacy will be of a patchwork roguelike, who borrowed from the Souls series to create something memorable. Thanks for watching. Hey mate, thanks for sticking around throughout the whole video. If you enjoyed it, you'll probably enjoy my other videos, so consider leaving a like or subscribing to my channel. If you didn't enjoy it, would you kindly explain your reasoning in the comments? I'm always looking to improve, and feedback is an essential part of that. So once again, thank you for stopping by, and I will see you soon.